Well, all right, folks, David Parsons here. Welcome to Nostalgia Trap. I'm going to start today's show by pathetically groveling for your $5 a month on Patreon. I've been making Nostalgia Trap for almost 10 years, which sort of blows my mind. And honestly, making and producing this podcast, doing these interviews each week, doing the live streams with Justin, honestly, all of it has become a deep part of my identity. It's a real honest passion for me. But the other part of it is I put a lot of time and energy into this show. And without your support, I don't think I could do it. I am, at this point, sad to say, most of my teaching jobs have dried up due to enrollment crashes, pandemic, etc. at the colleges I was teaching. So I'm like completely unemployed right now. And I don't say that to whine or make myself unique, because I know a lot of us are in precarious positions, but this is where I'm at. Nostalgia Trap has become the sort of little thread that's sustaining me right now. So if you are in any position to toss me $5 a month, go ahead and click the link in this episode description to our Patreon page. We've got a lot going on. I've been doing the News Trap episodes every week, very much enjoying those, and very much enjoying the conversations I'm having with Patreon subscribers in the comment section to those News Trap episodes. News Trap is just kind of me riffing on some big stories of the week that you may have missed in the algorithm. The algorithm may not have shown you the same things it showed me and Justin and the other folks that helped me produce this podcast. So, I'm sharing those each week, and it's been fun. So come on by. And, we're also doing the Las Vegas history. Episode 3 is coming soon. That is a subscribers-only program. All I'm saying is there are incentives. There's lots of reasons for you to come on and join the fun on our Patreon page. So please do that if you can. If you can't, no worries. Enjoy all the free content. I love you. Okay, that's enough for now. I want to get to our main guest today, David A. Banks. Very excited to share this interview. I think you're going to dig this. He is a geography and urban planning dude. He is at the University at Albany, SUNY. That's the State University of New York system. And he has an awesome new book. This like latches on to so many of the things we talk about on this show. It's called The City Authentic: How the Attention Economy Builds Urban America. And David answered so many of my questions on this in this interview about like why American cities all of a sudden have this kind of like historical, twee, kind of craft brewery factory kind of aesthetic. That has an answer. There's actually a whole political economy and culture to that. And that's what this book is about. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. Thanks so much for being part of the Nostalgia Trap family. Enjoy me talking with David A. Banks. Well, David Banks, good to see you. Welcome to Nostalgia Trap. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You have written a book that, as I was reading it this week, I was like sort of marveling at how much you have captured a lot of what we sort of try to get at on this show over the years, talking about cities and what it means to live in an American city and the sort of vibes of an American city. You've captured it. You've put it together. And I want to say the name of your book before we even get started. It's called The City Authentic: How the Attention Economy Builds Urban America. And again, the author is David Banks. We are lucky to have him with us today. But your book is about this concept of the city authentic. Maybe we can sort of start with that. I know it's sort of like you take a whole book to explain what it is, but I love this idea of authenticity, because ever since, and we can get into our personal stories of moving to small towns and watching them transform. But I've definitely sort of noticed a certain vibe or style in my city, which is Ventura, California. And I've struggled to put a name on it, but I think authenticity might have something to do with it. And your book is concerned with a region of upstate New York that seems like it has a very particular kind of experience in the last what couple decades, but more. I mean, I feel like this is like a more recent phenomenon of this authenticity game in selling cities to outsiders. When did you first start noticing this? Because I'm trying to think of like when I first started noticing this kind of particular strain of American architecture and businesses, etc.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, it's a weird experience because I grew up in South Florida. And so there I was kind of already trained to live in a place that is designed for other people to visit or like for
Mm-hmm.
other people's enjoyment, right? It's
Yes.
like everyone else is on vacation and you're just like a schlub going to work or school or something, right? And but then when I went to grad school in Troy, New York, just a couple minutes north of Albany, um, I at first I was just wowed by the completely different landscape, right? Both natural and social and cultural, right? Where
Mhm.
uh first there's grade changes. There's like mountains and stuff like that. That threw me. Uh it was Florida's sandbar. But also just like how old stuff was to my eyes. He's like the oldest thing that I had seen growing up in Florida was like maybe 1950 or something, it was like it's a very new place. And so when I uh was there in 2010, that was also when the cities around here started to like really try to attract the attention of what's usually called like the creative class, right? Like so like these um highly educated mobile workforce that has a lot of disposable income. And I started seeing
Sometimes derisively referred to as hipsters. I feel like this class of people.
there's probably like a big Venn diagram overlap of that. It's
Mhm.
hard to tell what is a hipster anymore, and maybe
Yes,
we can get
totally.
into that.
Yeah,
He's like we're like kind of post hipster, so like suffused into the culture in general. But
it feels
he's like
very
ever
2000s, 2010s. I think. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's important for the story of the city authentic because like part of hipsterdom that I think has been like suffused into the culture is this hyper awareness of like what sorts of like objects and clothing you surround yourself with and like what that says about you and what kind of categories you can put yourself into, right? This is all hipsters, and it's also very much the city authentic, which
Mm.
I generally define as like this like third movement of cities, right? So American history class, you probably heard like the City Beautiful movement when like a bunch of rich fucks like left didn't couldn't put any more money in killing native people in the West, and so they started building up the cities to start accumulating workforce and investment dollars into big American cities. And so you build a big library or concert hall or something, slap your name on it, and then that encourages other rich people to like start investing there. Also, just kind of signals that like the city is ready for investment.
This is like
Uh,
for those listening. This is like
yeah.
this is like the deep Gilded Age era, right? Like this is like
Yes.
I in
Yeah.
my mind, I'm like, okay, this is when the cities become like these palaces, and they start building, Central Park and monuments and statues everywhere.
Mhm.
The city beautiful movement. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
want to
that's
orient
it.
everyone in time and space.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's like it like goes like about 30 years on either side of the turn of the 20th century,
Okay.
right? It's about there. And and then after that, after World War II, you get what's called the city efficient movement generally. There's different names for this period in time, but it's generally the point at which cities have to be rationalized, and code becomes very important, both computer code, but also like zoning codes. Right. So this is all
Mhm.
just an effort to take the big, messy city that's also very dirty and kind of still like the holdovers of any sort of Victorian era kind of grossness and uniqueness, right? And you standardize things, and so you make the city much more amenable to centralized control and of corporate control, because now you have you have this thing called the automobile, right? The car that has to be fit into every single nook and cranny of the city. And because it's a mechanical device, it requires like this standardization and of like street widths and signage and stuff like that.
I was going to say
And
this
that,
sounds like the Robert Moses era in New York City.
yeah,
Okay.
that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Okay.
And then comes the city authentic, I say, a little before like there's inklings of it in the 80s. That's why I spent some time talking about the True Stories movie, which is by the Talking Heads,
Mm-hmm.
David Byrne. And then but it really comes into its own after the beginning of the 21st century, and this is a time where cities try to plumb their history, their cultural geography. They try to find stuff that happened in the past, or just like cool buildings that they still kept, that survived the city efficient movement, and are usually built. There's like a lot of fetishization of like the city beautiful buildings, right, that are brought forward.
These like
And
ornate old factory buildings and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so we take all these things and we weave these stories about them that then can start to create value for two reasons. One, because you can't make them anymore, and so they're scarce. They're like collector items.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're old, they have this like patina and character to them that you just can't get, especially now when everything is built out of like petroleum and fiberboard, right? And then, but then the second reason is also because like, um, especially in small and medium-sized cities where I live and what the book is about, they have to uh um position themselves as what I like to describe it as like the trendy thrift store find,
Yes.
compared to like the mainstream name brand of like a big city like LA or New York City, right? Anyone could come up with living there, right? But this is also like the flattery that the City Authentic does, is it says, "Oh, you're smart. You didn't fall for that. You can find like this urban chic life in a place that's actually much cheaper, and no one knows about it yet. You're on the ground floor," and like that. And so that's a big thing about the City Authentic, is that it flatters you, and it grabs things in the past and culture and history, to create some sort of value and economic development.
Oh, it's very recognizable to me for many different reasons. But let me start with just sort of living in New York City and particularly Brooklyn, and being around this creative class and academic class. I mean, I'm a podcaster with a history PhD, around a lot of other podcasters with PhDs and that sort of thing. There, at a
Yeah.
certain point, and I was in New York. I lived in New York from 2003 into 2017. So at some point around 2000, I don't know, 12, I started hearing people that are like, "We're moving to Beacon. We're going up to the Hudson Valley. We're heading upstate. We're going to these little towns." And they're describing like there's like a coffee house there that they like going to, or a sort of like little craft brewery or something like that. And I think craft brewery is always my shorthand for this sort of thing. But there's like a tweeness, like a twee kind of like, "Oh, we're going to these little like boutique town, maybe Saratoga or somewhere around Saratoga." And so like reading your book is just sort of a revelation to me, because I'm like, okay, this is part of a political economy. This is part of
Mhm.
this isn't just like incidental that like there's like these cute coffee houses and breweries and knitting factories and stuff like that up there. There's something going on that's deeper than just some even like just the creative class people who are drawn to it. There's something going on at the structural level. So like maybe we can describe like who is doing this, because it seems like you're right. I can go back and trace you. I mean, you do a great job of like thinking about how this has evolved since the 19th century, like in terms of like the white city in Chicago and stuff like that. But it seems like upstate New York has a very particular sort of story,
Yeah.
and one that as much as I recognize the tropes that you're talking about culturally in your book, having, being present all over America, it feels like upstate New York has a particular history of like being this, like, I don't know, post-industrial wasteland. And so it feels like that's the strategy. Is that right? Is this
Uh,
the strategy to revitalize these places? Is to
yeah,
sort of weirdly sell the history of the space?
yeah. So I argue that like like the phenomena that I'm studying, the city authentic, is global in scope, but it's really easy to look at in the Rust Belt, because the Rust Belt is really well positioned to have this happen to them, right?
Right,
Because
right.
these were these fairly large cities that then emptied out. I use like I'm coming at it from a Marxist lens, and so I'm like seeing, you see like the seesaw of capital where money leaves, and then capital just sort of waits for everything to decay, until usually there's like some sort of first mover that then like sort of signals that like, okay, it's time to start reinvesting, they've hit the bottom,
Hmm.
right? And so like you see one place that hit the bottom is Detroit, right? Where like as 2013 the city declares bankruptcy, and within a year the fucker that owns Intuit, right, the all the tax stuff, just like basically literally like buys downtown Detroit, and he's now like the biggest developer, the biggest employer. Like he just like he replaces um Henry Ford as like the figure of like the capitalist du jour in that region, right? And but he had to wait for everything to die, right? And in the seesaw of capital, as
Like a
Neil Smith
fucking
calls it.
vulture. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
and then you go
yeah.
back and pick the bones and resell it. I mean, it feels like what you're describing in your book is the nostalgia trap in a lot of ways, which is sort of
Yeah.
like we're just gonna like there's this endless cycle now. Instead of it having any vision of a future, we're just gonna like eat the past
Yes.
in these new ways and kind of repackage it.
And yeah, in a lot of ways, like literally eat the past, right? Like the consumption of like food and drink is really big here, largely because you're dealing with like these ephemeral concepts, ideas, semiotics, right? These like images that you can't interact with, because in any other way other than like kind of like wrapping it into something to buy, or is it, or an experience. And like Sharon Zukin, the urban sociologist that I rely a lot on, says that a lot of authenticity in cities. When we think about authenticity, what we're really talking about is the experience of origins,
Mm.
right? That it
Mm-hmm.
feels like you're experiencing like a place, or a thing that like was where something started, right? Like
Mm.
McSorley's
Mm-hmm.
Ale House
Right,
in
right.
yeah, right, in Manhattan, where it's like, oh, oldest continually operating bar in North America, right? Like you feel like it feels authentic because it feels like the beginning of something. And here in upstate, what that looks like is, I tell a story of this fairly young couple. The husband, Vic Christopher, was the economic development coordinator for the city, and then gets caught like stealing stuff. This is reported. I'm not accusing him of anything, right? From a city-owned
Allegedly,
building.
yeah.
Yeah, allegedly, right? He's like taking stuff out of this like city-owned building. It's just like old stuff that he's going to use to decorate his wine bar that him and his wife are putting together. And the bar, they live on, they buy the building, they live on top, they're building it down below. And and they call it the Lucas F Confectionery Wine Bar, right? And it's like, is it, but so it's not a candy shop, even though it's called the confectionery. It's a wine bar, and it's because there used to be a confectionery in there, right? And so you have to like, even if it's candy, something you can literally eat and consume, right? It's still, you want to make this like distance from the past and like do something that like is fun for adults, like drinking.
Mm.
and
Mhm.
and so you get this wine bar called the confectionery. Now of course, like there's a lot of curation and like decisions of like what parts of the past you want to bring back and highlight, right? So like you don't call it the Troy Insurance Company wine bar, which would have been the last thing that was in that
Like I said,
building.
the tanning
Yeah.
salon.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. You're not gonna do that. You're gonna do stuff that has that twee flavor
Sure.
to
The
it. Yeah.
confectionery. Yeah, I
Yeah.
urge people to look up Lucas Confectionery in Troy, New York. Because I looked it up and had to Google map it and see this
Yeah.
place. And God, it's so familiar. It reminds me
It
the
looks like
thing.
everywhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, it does, but it's hard for me not to think about Disneyland and like Main Street USA and the sort of like
Yeah.
selling of this thing because how does this fit into like the kind of new urbanism thing? Because it feels
Oh
like
yeah.
it's part of that too, right? It's like
Yeah.
there's a desire for a walkable neighborhood and an authentic old small town. It really, I mean, it does kind of feel like going back into the past.
Yeah.
But it feels like that's been packaged in many ways over the years, including by like people who are progressives who want to like get away
Oh,
from
absolutely.
the Robert Moses automobile metropolis and get us back to like sort of the values of the neighborhood. I don't know. In other words, like when I dropped down onto Google Maps in front of Lucas Confectionery, I was like, oh, like what a romantic scene this is on this
Yeah.
street. But what your book does a great job of doing is sort of like putting that in context of like the whole town and how it fits there. It's disturbing. And I guess we can continue the story of what happened with Lucas Confectionery because I found that really interesting too.
Oh yeah, so it's a hit, right? And
Yeah,
it
right.
creates and it makes the city, it puts the city on the map, so to speak. You start getting these like write-ups and like was it like New York Magazine Intelligencer, where it's like like someone with a pursuing a fine arts in an MFA, like they literally get someone with an MFA to say like
You got to,
don't
yeah.
like yeah like don't worry, this place is actually really nice and it's coming together, so it's like it's signaling like it's time to move up here kind of thing, and it's telling you like what the prices of the homes go for and stuff like that. It's really just like putting the city up on
This
a
is
platter.
crazy though.
Yeah.
My wife and I talk about this a lot. How can like a twee, old timey barber shop, coffee house, whatever the fuck, how like that draws people to an area on the
Yeah.
weekends, which is totally what's happening in our town. How can that be the sort of like economy of a city? Like it seems insane. And like part of the thing that I wanted to highlight, and maybe we can get to it, is the idea that like cities are like trying to draw these types of businesses by like offering them ridiculous sort of tax incentives and that sort of thing, and like almost giving their town over to building these projects
Yeah.
to the detriment of like their schools, their infrastructure, all the things that actually you need, like more than a twee coffee house. That seems like the sort of like I don't know. That seems like a big point of your story.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
let's break that down. Like, right, so like let's answer your question like like how the hell does this make money? Like and at the same time like who the hell's behind this, right?
Okay.
And like what's the idea here? And like part of it is the story really starts in the 70s where we lose a bunch of industry, right? It goes to China, it goes to Mexico, where it's not in the United States, right? Or really all of North America. And so all cities don't know how to make money after that, right? Because the only way that American cities developed was what's called smokestack chasing, and the smokestacks aren't listening; they're gone, right? And America never really had an internal development policy, right? The Department of the Interior was like the place that you went to like extract oil from federal lands. Like it's not a development agency. And so there's this like big hole and to be filled of like what the hell do cities do? How do they stop becoming basket cases with like these like increasing bills and like fleeing population, right? And this isn't really answered for like a decade, for more than a decade, right? The 70s, 80s, and 90s are this very weird time for cities until like the mid 90s, where we just get this like dramatic drop in crime, right? That still no one can fully explain. So you get this
Mm.
drop in crime while also this guy named Richard Florida from the University of Pittsburgh starts drawing together all of these ideas about cultural planning, which is a field that that is fairly new at the time. And he brings it together in like this new package for North American audiences of like what the hell to do with your city, right? And just real quick, what the cultural planning is. This is like you know, going into communities and saying like, oh, okay, you know, what are you into? What do you want to turn any of this into a small business? Like, you know, maybe we can make this a tourism industry thing, right? You know, like pretty modest expectations there, right? You know, nothing too exciting there. You know, like NPR sort of stuff, right?
Right.
But then but what ends up happening with uh Florida is he's pulling a lot of stuff mostly from the UK and some from Australia where this is really taking off. And he says like, look, you can the new oil, you know, like the new source of value is in creativity. And the creative and so this value is locked into the heads of these twee weirdos, right? This creative class. And you have to attract them, whether you like them or not. You have
Mm.
to attract them to your city, make them happy, and then everything else will follow, right? You know, he's very very coy about this, where he's like, that's not all I'm saying. I'm saying that everyone's a little bit creative, but only some people make a lot of money being creative, and it's not,
Interesting.
you know, and it's
This
and
is like
nothing's
well before the internet
yeah
influencer kind of age, right? Like
yeah oh yeah no
well before
he
even the startup age. It seems like because I associate a lot of this with like startup culture too.
the Rise of the Creative Class is published in 2002.
Okay. Wow.
So it's a little before all of
Yeah.
this, right? You know, and it's, you know, it's a very weird time culturally, you know, like we're still spinning around from 9/11. It's confused, things are really confusing. But you know, like and we're also, there's also this interesting point where he's like trying to figure out like how LGBTQ people fit into this, because he keeps noticing that like these like alternative communities are also like can also like breed all this innovation, or at least they're always adjacent to it or something. So he has like this really cringy stuff called like the gay index or
Oh
something. It's just like
dear.
very very strange stuff. And there's just like graphs that say like bohemianism, and it's just like going up, like
It's still really
strange stuff.
interesting stuff though. Like the
Yeah,
fact that it's that explicit, you know,
yeah,
for
yeah,
this guy that like there's something going on. It's like there's something going on with hip gay people. I don't know, creative people, and
yeah.
it's like you're it's like I don't know, you're almost there. It sounds kind of silly, but at the same time, I feel like cities have kind of embraced some of this.
Yeah, yeah. And so the other thing that's happening, right, is now that the smokestacks are gone, right, and you're replacing them with this creative class stuff, right? A lot of the creative class stuff is also embedded in, or at least is attendant to the FIRE industries, like finance, insurance, and real estate, right? Give you an example of like the connection here, right? Soho, right, south of Houston Street, like the hip artist neighborhood from
Sure.
like the 70s and 80s, right? That begins, right, as industry leaves, artists need a place to go do all their cool bohemian stuff, right? And then 80s coke fueled financial geniuses, right? You know, like the you know, American Psycho types are like, you know, like, you know, I definitely want to be cool too, and I have a bunch of money, but I'm not like you know, quote unquote creative, but I can definitely live next to the creative people. And so you get this like intense investment into Soho, um
It's what happened with
as a real
Williamsburg
estate
too. It
venture.
feels like
Yeah,
that cycle in Williamsburg was happening, you know, in 2002, right when this project comes out. You know,
yeah.
I
And
feel
the
like it was already happening because when I got to Williamsburg, when I got to Brooklyn, I never lived in Williamsburg, but it was, you know, it was a hipster haven, and there was still a sense
yeah.
that like, you know, a regular kid might be able to go live in Williamsburg and hang out with the creative people, but that's over. Now it's just like a big fucking luxury apartments and Whole Foods and all that shit.
Yeah, because then what happens is that the fire industry in replacing like actual manufacturing, right? They have very different material interests. They want land prices to go up. They want like the price of everything to go up, because they're all of their jobs are like basically like percentages off of actual productive work, right?
Mm,
They, you know,
right.
they're the insurance for the productive work. They are the the managers of the building, right? Like they have all these things that they just sort of leech off of, and they make more money as everything else becomes more expensive, and as they raise prices, everything becomes more expensive too. So it's just sort of this ratcheting effect where everything goes up and up and up and up and up.
Mm.
Whereas when you manufacture stuff, you want like cheap cost of living because it's a high labor intensive job. You want like cheap land because factories are big, right? So this is basically why cities start acting like this, is because fire industries have replaced industrial manufacturing, and these little cultural items are become really fascinating, especially for small and medium-sized towns, because again, right, those are things that don't feel like they can be exported. And so they're like, well, if we can hang our hat on our history,
Mm.
which by definition happens here, right, we won't have that same problem again where things just leave, right? So if we can be a cool place,
Like
right?
it's so that's so
Yeah,
weird, dude. That's like
it's
it's selling a particular history forever, though, right? It's like saying like,
yes,
okay, I mean, in the history of California and the development of the architecture here along like this sort of like Spanish frontier days, sort of mission era look and feel here. It's weird because it feels like it's like an attempt to sort of lock in the brand. Like the brand is just that Spanish days era is what California looks like. And down to towns having codes about red tile roofs and those sort of things because they want to preserve. And that's so, like it's so depressing to think that like we would, as a society, we would want to like sort of lock and forever sell one image of a past that, I mean, as a historian, it's sort of, it's maddening because it's like not even a real past,
yeah.
but it seems like people dig that, I guess. I mean, you're saying that, like, I mean, it seems like, I guess that my question is, has this strategy worked? Let's think about it that way. Like, has this
Yeah,
strategy
yeah.
worked? Because it feels like, well, I did have, and do have a lot of friends and that sort of are in this creative class position that did move upstate,
Yeah.
and did move to towns like Beacon, etc. So how I do wonder how they're all doing.
Right. So we can judge it at least two different ways, right? Of like whether or not it worked. Did it work financially? Boy howdy, yes, right?
Yeah.
Like just rents have gone up astronomically. Especially after the pandemic, but it was before the pandemic too. Rents were like, just going up and up and up since basically like 2009, right? Like because there's an interesting effect that is very specific to Albany area, in that it has a very high union density. It's the highest union density in the country, actually. And so the recession wasn't so bad around here. And so that meant that, when once they did start investing in these creative class, city authentic projects, right? They didn't really have that huge bust uh, of the housing sector.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a little bit of an edge on that, which I think is why it's so advanced around here. Like this effect is so advanced around here, and you see it coming in other places, But yeah, in general, it's financially, yeah, lots and lots of money. Now, population, not so much, right? You get, because you're specifically attracting like 20, 30 somethings that have a lot of disposable income, and you are encouraging them to interact with the place at like a consumer level, they're not attached to anything. And so they leave pretty quickly. And so what I saw in the data was that like the size of like the 8 counties around the capital region that the capital region's made out of, it's like 4 core counties, and then like some state institutions like define it with 8. They had a modest gain in population, actually less than the gain statewide, right? So they're not gaining a ton of population. What they're gaining, what's happening is a lot of people are leaving, being displaced, and being replaced by richer people. right? But the amount of overall people is not increasing very much.
Mm.
And where they want to live is actually fairly diverse. Some do want to live in these downtown walkable neighborhoods that are very cute and new urban, well, old urbanism,
Right, right, yeah.
the original urbanism that new urbanism tries to mimic. But also like some of the biggest change, some of the biggest census tracts, or sorry, some of the census tracts with the biggest changes and increases in population are just boring suburban neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Because they want to, because at least I would speculate that a lot of them enjoy, like downtown Saratoga on the weekend, but for the most part, that's a diversion or like something fun to
Yeah,
do
they're kind of
in
like
addition to
tourist
just kind of like
places.
cheap, yeah, instead of just like a cheap, relatively cheap suburban house.
I guess what I'm thinking about is all all those schools and infrastructures that are getting fucked over by these cities that are sort of like draining their tax base to give them to these development projects, because it seems like, okay, all right, let's go live with the cool downtown nearby, but our school sucks. And like that seems like it would be, I mean, exactly the opposite of what so many people who move from the city, and ostensibly, I think that they're trying to draw people from Brooklyn, right? Like, if you look at the map of people that left the city during the pandemic, they say like, oh, the New York City drained during the pandemic. It's all like Park Slope. Like
Yeah,
everyone that left was like had a lot of money, and they went out to
yeah.
these suburbs in New Jersey, and they went out to, I guess, Long Island a little bit, but they also went to these upstate New York towns. And I just wonder like what they find, because it seems like the impetus for going to the suburbs for so many of these like people with money is to like is when once they have kids, they're like, well, it's now time to like go live in a town where there's good schools and all that kind of stuff. But it sounds like, I don't know, it might be mixed in terms of getting a good schools and infrastructure up there.
Well, for the rich, right? Like they don't care about public schools; they send their kids to private school, so it
A
doesn't
good
matter.
good point. Yeah.
Right, and in a lot of cases, what I'm finding are like these really tight, closed off circuits of capital and of sociality, right? Like people talking just to like the people that just moved in up
They're the
there,
only people that
right?
exist in that town
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
So like for example, Ulster County, I talked to this real estate agent that basically her whole job, right, was to take people in Park Slope and help them move to Ulster County, like Woodstock area, right? And part of it was just, like teaching them, like what it means to live in the country. That was actually something that she had found herself having to do, right? Because she had just done it herself, like right, like she did this and then liked it so much that she changed professions to get everyone else to go do this too, and correctly recognize that there's a ton of money to be made there. And
That's like that's some colonizer shit. That's amazing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and
Old
so what
school, really. I mean, it's the
it,
booster thing. Like you could, there's money to be made in being a booster for an area, obviously.
yeah, yeah, and also like this region like gets waves of this every couple of decades. This happens, right? So she's just one of like, and which is what she says. Like like many
You,
people have done this before.
it's the
You
trend
know,
pieces. You know it's happening.
yeah,
I hear the Twin Peaks like it is happening again. Like because you see the trend pieces
yeah,
like, oh fuck, upstate's having a moment again. Or I mean, around
yeah,
here, it seems like since pandemic quote unquote became over, it's just been a fucking bonanza of this type of shit around here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what these people once they move up here, they realize that like no one else likes them. It's because
Yes.
they'll go on like Nextdoor and Facebook Marketplace or something, like asking for, like someone to plow their driveway in the winter, right? Because they found out that they need that
I was
because
gonna say,
again,
what are these country things you got to
yeah,
know that the city people
yeah.
don't know? It must have to do with like scraping your windshield and getting out of mud and shit like that.
Yeah, well, it's mostly services. It's like new services that you didn't know you needed, like heating oil,
Mm-hmm.
firewood, yeah, usually picking up your garbage, because if you're living in unincorporated county land, you have to arrange for your own garbage pickup and stuff like that, right? And so they're trying to figure all this stuff out, and the response that they get is like, fuck off. Just
Yes.
like from the the people that have lived there longer. They don't want to help them and they don't care. So this real estate agency made their own app for their own customers so that they could help each other, right? And this is these are the sorts of circuits that you see all over the place, because you also, like, I don't know if this
That
happens
is
in
so
your town.
amazing. Yeah.
I know, because like I see this in Troy where I live and a couple other places. You'll see like a store, or like like a window, right? And it's not even completely clear how to get in. Like there's like a back door or something, but you just see like a window, and the window will have like 4 nouns on it. It'll be like olive, plum, and feather,
Yes. Yes.
Williamsburg or something. Like it'll
Yes.
just like say shit like that, right? And it could be a tapas bar, it could be a
No,
hair salon,
everything's
it
play.
could be,
Everything we talk about this all the time. It's like, so everything's called things like button and thread,
yeah.
and shit like that. Like it's just like they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Needle and haystack. There's one downtown here called Finch and Fork. And
Right, right.
they're all aiming for a certain. To me that sounds so fucked up though, that like and I don't know what to call these people, like the creative class
Yeah.
people. On some level, like these are people I know generally.
Mhm.
I'm rolling my eyes at this sort of like culture on one hand. But it makes me think about sort of where what happens to the people that move to these places expecting a certain experience,
Yeah, yeah.
and why they have to sequester themselves on their own
Mm.
apps. That's such a
Yeah,
like insane idea that like the local population will hate them. I mean, it
yeah,
makes sense. I mean, because like how could you not hate these people? The creative class coming in here with all their twee bullshit. There's that end, but there's like the real end of like they're driving rent up. They're making our schools shittier. There's like a sense of like the invaders. I think there's a few towns that have like actually had really like a lot of animosity between like these new sort of like twee businesses and the local population. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, so one last thing about like all these all these different shops that are like named like 4 different nouns
Yes,
is
please.
that, right, is that they're I'm convinced they're actually like intentionally a little bit vague, or at least they realize that they don't have to advertise themselves to the street face, because all of their customer base comes from online. It comes from these closed circuits, right? So
Interesting.
that's why everything looks that way, is because it doesn't need to look any other way, because it's not interfacing with like the city in this organic manner. It's like findable content from Instagram that you then like identify the business with what the little square you saw on Instagram.
I'm
Like
glad you
it's
mentioned Instagram, because
yeah,
Instagram comes up in your book several times, and it's important, right?
yeah. Oh, very important.
Because it's part of the sort of visual language of these spaces is a social media culture that values the kind of like the composed shot of a salad with some strawberries in it, and like there's like a Edison light bulb in the background.
Yeah,
They kind of
yeah.
like, I'm eating this sort of like new American California cuisine. I thought it was hilarious that like one of the things that the guy that owns this Lucas Confectionery, like when they announced the
I know what you're gonna
project,
bring up. Yeah.
yeah, when they announced the project, they're like, he is now, as we speak, he is now touring Napa and
Napa
Sonoma
Valley on a Vespa.
on a
Yeah.
Vespa.
This is the
Yeah,
art. Yeah, this is the
to
article where
learn
they're
about
announcing that
California
he was
olives.
arrested.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is in the same article where they're like economic development professional arrested, and then like a new paragraph, and it's and it's like a brochure for his upcoming wine bar. It's bizarre, but I know
yeah.
exactly what happened, is that he gave them like basically a press release, and they ran it, right? So it's like, because that's also a big part of
It
the
is
city
very
authentic
Trumpian.
is,
Like
yes,
it's
yeah,
it's it's very like the guy literally leverages his legal troubles
yeah,
to like a press release that talks up him touring California on a Vespa to collect information about authentic olives and cheese and cuisine that he's going to bring to the people of Troy. It's intense, and yeah, it works. It is the sort of vibe of American business right now, and the sort of like that city thing seems like it's really important. I wonder if we can talk about this word authenticity, because it feels like, and we mentioned like the hipster thing or whatever, and that going away or maybe transitioning in our era, whatever. But like I feel like for people that are thinking about picking up your book, I want them to know that this isn't just a political economy of upstate New York in the last few years. It's also gets a little existential in thinking about sort of what does it all mean, and what are we doing in these cities, and what do we all kind of how are our desires, I guess, being manipulated here? And that stuff gets really, really interesting. So I guess we should ask this question of what is authenticity, because it's like, I guess people are looking for it, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah. So I spend it's chapter 3. There's a whole chapter that is just trying to answer this question, right? And there's a ton of different flavors and kinds of authenticity that people have discovered that kind of overlap and integrate with each other, right? Some of the more important ones actually come from tourism studies, which is a real thing. Like like there are schools and departments full of like people who study tourism. And there's one scholar, Ning Wang, who brackets out like 3 different kinds. One is objective, and that's like authenticating something, right? Like that painting is a authentic de Kooning, right, or something like that, right? And that require, and what's the evidence of that? It's chain of custody, it's like checking out the brush strokes, stuff like that, right? But then there is like this like socially constructed authenticity, which is basically a setting up of expectations and then meeting those expectations, right? So you advertise that like Hawaii is hula skirts and pineapple, and then you get there and you find hula skirts and pineapple, and you're like, authentic, yeah, expectations have been met, right? And then but then this third one is existential authenticity, which in this article, I'll say, if I recommend reading the article, but it comes out of nowhere. It's just like, what? Because like the first 2, it gets kind of boring. It seems like something that like the creative director of Marriott Hotels would be reading, and then it just goes into like metaphysics. And it says, like in the existential mode, which is the one that we that most places that call themselves authentic or get read as authentic, this is what they're doing, is they take frustrated expectations of the self, right? That like you saw yourself as an explorer or a fashionista, like an urban sophisticate, right? That was what you always wanted to be, but then like life got in the way. You have to be an insurance salesman, or you have an email job and you can't really explain what the hell it is you do and or why you make so much money doing it, right? And so it's vacations and tourism in which you embody your true self, right? And authenticity is when you have an experience, maybe of origins, but generally of self, right? You have an experience where you feel like you are your true self, and that reads to you as authentic, like of the object, the thing that you are experiencing is authentic.
The real person deep inside me.
Yeah.
That
So
even though been buried by, it sounds like midlife crisis shit. Like people in their 40s, in their 40s can be sold this shit hardcore. I mean, there's a store downtown that I think is sort of one of the flagships of this whole project in our town. It's called Iron and Resin. They sell a very sort of like they sell a very like industrial, working class, blue collar guy, motorcycle thing, but also like surfer truck guys, wrenching. But everything in there is really expensive. And the people who shop there are like, these 45-year-old finance douchebags who like get a leather jacket and like do that classic, like I may be a nerdy accountant guy, but actually on the weekends, I'm a motorcycle warrior, and I'm Marlon Brando in The Wild One or whatever. And like, I mean, it's so easy. It seems like in a culture like ours, where we're all sold out like that, it seems very easy to sell that fantasy to people.
Yeah, but I think I achieved this throughout the book. I'm always very understanding of like falling for it, basically, because one, I fell for it, right? Like I bought a fucking house here. Like I'm the rube, right? Like I'm just explaining like what I fell for, right?
Totally.
And
I've been to some
yeah,
of these places. I have shopped at
yeah,
Iron and Resin actually.
right, right, yeah.
I'm not
And
immune to
like
any of this stuff because it's like
no,
partly like, oh, this is the culture that's around, I guess.
yeah, and well, and also because like we're all these pressures are all hitting us at the same time, right? He's like it could be a midlife crisis, and I definitely think, I didn't look at age ranges in this way, but I would agree that probably men in their 40s are probably very susceptible to this, but
Mm,
it's also getting pushed much younger, where because like so many places do feel the same.
hmm
But that like now you're like reeling and searching for an authentic, grounded kind of like life when modernity is so like where everything changes all the time, right? Like that horse ebooks tweet, right? It's like, like because everything is changing so much and like nothing feels deep or unique or
That's what makes
like
it so
thoughtful.
cynical to sell this stuff and package it because it feels like an
Yeah,
impulse that is that it is an I hate to use the word authentic, but it's an authentic impulse, a feeling of like I
yeah,
want something different than the garbage, the like that I've been sold. I can't help thinking about like Walter Benjamin and the idea of aura and like the work of art and the mechanical reproduction because it seems like he was locating this idea and it seems like it's still there where there's a longing for something that isn't mechanically reproduced. There's a longing for something that is, I guess, authentic.
yeah.
And it feels like none of us knows exactly what that is, but we know it when we see it.
I tried to hold off citing that until like basically the final chapter, right? In a section called the art of digital reproduction. Or was it
mm-hmm.
like I played on the title in a
Mm-hmm.
way that's so clever I can't recall it. But buy the book and you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Here
But the
I'm pulling it up. So go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, but in that like one thing that people don't quite remember from that essay if they ever read it, right? Everyone kind of like knows the gloss of like it when you mechanically reproduce things, like the aura of those mechanically produced, mass produced objects, right, is lost, and so you don't really like so it doesn't have any kind of like a deeper meaning or appeal to it, right? It's all very shallow, right? That's the aura is this like history that comes with the object, right, and its connection to social and cultural milieus. But what it usually gets glossed over and missed is that what is the upshot of that, according to Benjamin, is that now those mass-produced objects and art need to just be like really in your face and like really like intense because they have to evoke something in you, but they can't rely on actual you like authentic, right, like human connection. It
Mm-hmm.
has to be like this spastic in your face experience, which I think we see like the ratcheting effect of it. You have to outpace the last generation of this impulse, right?
Right, right.
Which is why this is how he gets to the idea that eventually, right, like fascism, this eventually leads to some sort of fascistic enterprise where the everyone decides to trade the ability to like have their ideas or interests like realized in the public, right? Like handing over your civic responsibilities to a representative or some kind, and instead you're just happy with seeing your opinions reflected back at you in
Mm.
some sort of like really like evocative, emotionally spirited way, right?
And it
Which is
sounds
what
like the algorithm, honestly.
yeah,
The
which is
social media algorithm is like it's like the most narcissistic object in some way because it's like you pour your ideas into it and then it amplifies them and gives you an endless scroll of those
yes,
of those ideas in sort of like infinite kind of constructions. Yeah. God,
yeah,
that's scary.
yeah, and what's even scarier and more like sadistic, right, is that this doesn't this doesn't end on your phone, right? Is now because like the part of the point of the city authentic is that you take all that information of what people like, and then you make the city with it too.
Oy.
Because like you're reaching, like economic development professionals are now like going to like buying ads on the basis of like where did you used to live here? what's your income bracket now? Where do you live now? We could deliver ads to people in places that are more expensive to live in, and say like, don't you want to move back, where it's a little bit cheaper, but you still get the urban experience, right? So they'll do
Mm.
that too, but then they also have to deliver that urban experience, quote unquote, right? And like that's where I see like this kind of like almost shoehorn theory, or not shoehorn, horseshoe theory, right? Where liberals who love this like cutesy twee shit, right? Have this same kind of return, spelled with a V, kind of like, cultural return sort of feeling that the hard right has. Like they
Yes.
want, because they're both
It's all
responding to the,
nostalgia trap, my friend,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, because it's all like deeply desiring this like meaningful thing that yeah is very nostalgic, and it's all fucking poison. Like just
Yeah,
like yeah.
and the further we go into the internet age, the more there's like nostalgia for like this analog moment, but it's delivered to us through like I like you follow the like 80s culture Instagram, and you get like Full House clips and shit like that. If you like,
Yeah.
I mean, this is another subject, but maybe it's not, because it goes to the Benjamin stuff and it goes to the authenticity stuff. It's sort of like, if I don't know if you've noticed, but if you scroll through the most demonic iteration of what social media is now, is these like scrolls like YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels, or TikTok. I mean, it's
Right.
all TikTok. It's all basically the casino model, the kind of a constant loop that you can't get off of these videos. But what I've noticed about them, so many of them are just like old clips of TV shows. Like here's like a 30 seconds of David Bowie talking on a TV show in the 70s. And I'm thinking, God, this is a perfect metaphor for exactly what you're talking about. Instead of like building a new future, we're instead going to go back and just eat the past and just go show you. I mean, think of how many different TikTok clips you could make out of the collected archive of TV and movies. I mean, it's forever, right? We could just basically watch everything that's been made forever. We don't have to make anything new. And it seems like a confectionery, coffee house, wine bar in an old factory or whatever the fuck it is part of that too. And the way you tie that all together is that, God, what you just mentioned, the algorithm drawing people to these places, like, of course. I mean, the history of California is advertising and boosting the place and getting people to move here. So why not use the algorithm to do that?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
demonic vision, really.
It really is. Yeah, and I do like to I always want to couch it in history, because I never want to utter the phrase that is in like every internet studies article, where like the internet didn't invent this, but it did accelerate it, or something
Right.
like that.
Sure.
Like there's always something like that. But so I usually try to like uh, be really specific about like
Yeah. What do
how
we
these
mean by
sorts of,
that? Yeah.
yeah, or at least like how these digital systems like maybe kind of actually slow things down, or get us into like tighter loops or something like that. Because like Lewis Mumford, right, this like philosophic urbanist guy, who actually, like the department I work out of, at the University at Albany, has a Lewis Mumford Center, right? So it's
I
he
figured.
was
Yeah. It's a
he
big
was
name.
working, yeah, he was working in this area, and he understood, and he was also very catty, which no one really picks up on. But he's like just like such a, he can be such a little bitch sometimes.
I appreciate that. I
Something,
love
it's
catty
very
bitches.
cool.
I mean, I'm one
Yeah,
myself, and
yeah,
I try to restrain
yeah.
that impulse on the podcast. But yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so yeah, but he called the era of good feelings the era of bad taste,
Nice.
because because like it would be like in the 1800s, you get like, like this nouveau riche guy would make his like brownstone look like an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb or something, right? And today we look at that and we go, wow, look at how well it's built, and all the details and stuff, and like, oh, it's, yeah, it does have this like interesting little retro, like, or like, connection to the classics and stuff. But at the time it's just like gaudy like bullshit, right? And
Right.
so time does this really weird thing to us, where even the nostalgia of the past comes back to us as an authentic representation of a much earlier past, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so so it builds on these layers, and like what you were saying earlier about how, like, when you freeze these moments in amber, right? So like, are you really just going to keep experiencing that same period of time over and over again for how long, right? So like, when the same guy that made the wine bar also bought a dive bar, right? To round out his portfolio of restaurants, right? And which is all that he's doing, right? Is because because at that same year, dive bars were listed as like the upcoming theme of
Oh yeah,
bars,
it's a big
like that.
big yeah. It goes from dive bar to dive bar in quotes, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
an idea of a dive bar. Yeah.
yeah. And so he takes an actual dive bar called Bradley's and turns it into a dive bar themed bar called the Bradley. And the changes are just that subtle, right? Where he doesn't change a lot, which is great because that's cheap, right? But it's also like, just like a little, it gets an Instagram account, right? And there's just like all these very specific things
It's
that
so
change.
weird. That I thought that was a weird
Yeah,
example in your book, in part because of the subtlety of the change. You're right.
yeah,
Because usually we're kind of like, oh, it's very broad and very obvious when there's doing this craft brewery shit.
yeah.
But
But
it
a
also
lot of
can
it can
be,
be very subtle.
yeah, and that's a lot that's happening around here. I mean, my saddest example is the Holiday Cocktail Lounge in the East Village, which I went to for many years. It was my favorite place to like kind of hang out with dirt bags and be a wastoid and get like a Budweiser and a shot of Jack Daniels for like $3. That and so when they closed after the guy died, I mean, the place was there for like 50, 60 years, something like that. It got bought by like some startup douchebags that said, we're gonna don't worry, we're gonna retain the original Holiday Cocktail Lounge. And indeed, it is still called the Holiday Cocktail Lounge, but there are subtle differences. And one of my friends and I went in there to get. They said they retained their special of the beer and the whiskey because they know that that's what people want there. But what we got was like a craft IPA in like this little sort of like 8-ounce little silver jar thing that he gave us, and then
Yeah.
the side shot was whiskey with cinnamon and cardamom in it, and it was just sort of like we looked at it and we were like,
Yeah.
this isn't
Yeah.
what it once was. But yet there's like a red rope outside and people are lined up that have
Oh
money,
my
and
God.
I
Yeah.
felt like, I mean, it really is kind of like a movie moment for me of like, well, this isn't the place. And what was I saying in my mind? Like, it's not authentic anymore. It's not what it once was. And yet
Yeah.
they're sort
Yeah.
of selling it like that. It's just
Yeah.
generational, I guess. I don't know.
And like part of it is also what Crystal Abaddon calls porous authenticity,
Mm,
which is where maybe you do have like a very polished exterior. This is mostly for influencers, but cities must do this also. I've found is like, you put on a good face most of the time, but crucially, in order to gain authenticity and maintain it, to distinguish yourself from just a celebrity, right? Are these moments of seemingly unscripted or even like ugly or unkempt like moments, right? Like the I woke up this way kind of
ah,
moment,
ah,
right? Where or like or a blooper reel of some kind, right? Like the cities have to do something very similar. Because people are savvy, right? Like people have started to get like very hip to the idea that we're all being marketed to. Everything is a commodity, right? And so like this is a little too good to be true. So if you show them something that is bad, right? Or at least like a little goofy or off center,
oh my
right?
God. Yeah,
Then you're like, oh,
sure.
okay, there it is. And then you relax and you're like, they're telling me the truth because they also said something that was like self-effacing. So
That
like
is
I
amazing. Clever, clever. And then it's
yeah,
like this contrived sort of thing to let you know we're real, we're not fake,
yeah,
because it
yeah,
seems like that's the ultimate thing that people don't want, is to think that it's fake or that they're being sold in some way, even though you kind of know it. I mean, it all gels very deeply with the whole whatever we call the Trump era in
mhm,
terms of people say, how could people support Donald Trump when they know all this about him? But it seems like we're very capable of like sort of categorizing these things.
yeah.
And
Well,
God, yeah,
it's also because like we know so much about him, right? And
right.
reads as authentic, right? When he gets on stage and says like, what was it? It was like the first debate where he's like, he opens his arms wide, gesturing to like everyone else on the stage. And he's like, I've paid all of these people. Like at one point in my life, I've donated to every single one of their various campaigns. That's what politics is. Now I'm going to stop because why give money to them when I can do it myself? And that read, so many people, I don't understand like how no one can see that as like a defining moment in his campaign where like a lot of people I think got activated in that moment. We're like, that's finally someone cutting through the bullshit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, and so that's why I also like in the book say like, you know, like how can someone like literally the most famous person to ever exist, likely Donald Trump, right? Like, I think probably more living people on the planet know him than have known anyone else.
That's a tall
ever.
claim. I don't know if that's true. I mean, you might be right.
You know, like that like he how can he be authentic when authenticity is all about like, you know, personal intimate connection, right? But it's because he's able to like very like he's not smart necessarily, right? But he like his brain is like so like tied into the matrix, you know,
Yeah, right.
that like he just acts in these ways that read to us as authentic through the screen in like just this like perfect manner
Yeah. Yeah.
that everyone is trying to emulate now, right? Like everyone is trying to do that
Well, it
because it's
seems like
so effective.
he's kind of the model of the right calibration of authenticity and performance that you're talking about in your book with cities. Is that like you can tell when it's fake, you know, but when it's just right, it actually can hit very, very powerfully. And it feels like, you know, with algorithms that are able to actually drill into people's tastes, it brings back the kind of you know, one thing that I get from Benjamin and the idea of aura and all that mechanical reproduction is like part of what he's describing is like a human hand being taken away, or a sort of the human touch being further and further away from the object or the created object. And that's, I mean, that's so true with algorithms, but it's also just the logic of capital. You begin to wonder like, who is in control of any of this? You know what I mean? Like who, like this is instead like if we've released the logic of capital as the only sort of organizing principle of building our society, then we're going to get an Instagram ass twee factory, old factory downtown, because that's what it thinks it wants. And it's almost in a weird way shaping the zeitgeist. Like it is the zeitgeist. It's a mind fuck. And like your book made me think a lot of this stuff, David. I really appreciate you coming on because it feels like you are taking a lot of the, I don't know, the kind of stoner philosophical stuff we like to throw on this show about the internet and thinking about it in terms of the built environment of our cities. So anyway, congrats on the book. It's really great.
Thank you. Yeah. I think it, you know, the one thing that I think I achieved in this is one, convincing people that like, you know, that what's on the internet eventually comes out of the internet, right? Especially
Right,
since like
right.
everyone that makes money has like some sort of like tech concern connection, right? Investment, and they're not satisfied with that. With you know, so they want to like make everything in its image, and so I see, you know, like the eventually, you know, we're gonna get to these like subscriber city sort of things, right? Where you get like a subscription, like an Amazon Prime subscription to like your downtown. Like I still feel like that's going to happen. Right. You know,
The like melding, like the we're seeing these worlds meld. You know, like the kind of like online world and real world in lots of, I don't know, both like exhilarating and frightening and weird ways. But it feels, yeah, I agree with you. You know, when I see like I just got an email about Amazon healthcare, where it's like, you know, like literally like for $10.99 a month, you get access to these kinds of doctors. But if you got cancer, you have to pay $25 a month to get access to these kinds of. It's fucking nuts, dude. And it feels like, yeah, why wouldn't it go that way? And that's part of, I guess, what freaks me out is feeling like the machines are in control. I just watched The Matrix again last night. You know, it feels like that's where we're at. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, dude. I want to say the name of your book again before we go. It's called The City Authentic: How the Attention Economy Builds Urban America. David Banks, I appreciate you coming on. Come back again and talk more with us about the cities and the internet. I love it.
I would love to. Thanks a lot.
Well, all right, my friends. I think that's going to do it for Nostalgia Trap today. I want to thank my guest, David A. Banks. Super fun conversation. I don't think I'll be able to go to any of these little craft businesses in my town anymore without thinking about this book. So check it out. It's called The City Authentic: How the Attention Economy Builds Urban America. Thanks so much for being a Nostalgia Trap listener. If you want to be a Nostalgia Trap supporter, we really appreciate it. Go check out our Patreon page. The link is in our episode description. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good week. Bye-bye.